Hey guys, how y'all doing tonight? Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you all for joining me. This is episode 160 of Hockey on the Spot. And for today's episode, we're going to continue on with the NHL's 30 teams in 30 days. And we've officially arrived at our final destination state-wise. We are now in the state of sunny California, and that is where we will be for our final three videos. We are at our last stop for as far as traveling goes. California, again, is where we will be for our final three videos. We're going to touch upon the three California-based teams. And the first California-based team we're going to touch upon, the team that we're going to talk about today, is none other than the defending Stanley Cup champions. That's right. Today, we're going to talk about the Los Angeles Kings. And last year for the Los Angeles Kings, is pretty self-explanatory. They won the Stanley Cup, obviously, but it was not an easy road to get there because they did have some struggles at points in the regular season. Last year, they really didn't bring in too many players in the offseason. And why would they really need to? Because their roster was absolutely stacked going into last year. They did manage to trade off Jonathan Bernier and get Ben Scrivens and Matt Fratton from the Toronto Maple Leafs, but both of them were not Kings for long. Eventually, Ben Scrivens was traded to the Edmonton Oilers to solidify their goaltending because of how good Martin Jones played when Jonathan Quick got hurt. And Matt Fratton was eventually also traded to the Columbus Blue Jackets, and we'll talk more about that trade later. Plus-minus wise, the Los Angeles Kings tied for fourth in the league with the St. Louis Blues to have a plus 37 rating. They were technically fifth, however, the Blues were considered first. Last year, for the Los Angeles Kings, there were a lot of positives to take out of their team. Their penalty killing maybe wasn't as good as they maybe were expecting it to be. It wasn't even in the top 10, but it was still in the top 15. Their penalty kill was 11th in the league at 83.1%. Which means their penalty killing was good, but not great. But a couple areas about their team that were pretty good is that they didn't take the most penalties in the league. They were in the middle of the pack, 14th in the league at 10.7%. They were in the top 15 as far as least penalized teams, at least, though they were at the bottom. But the biggest positive that came out of their season last year was their goals against average. Number one in the league in goals against at 205%. They gave up the least amount of goals in the National Hockey League, that even less than the Boston Bruins. So, for the Los Angeles Kings, even though their penalty killing was just okay, at even strength, they were the best defensive team in the NHL. This was a team that they were built for their defensive style, known for their defensive style, and they did an absolutely great job at it last year. But despite, and not to mention, Jonathan Quick was once again one of the better goaltenders in the league, although one could argue that there was some inconsistency to his game last year. And there was. Last year, through 49 games played, 27, 17, and 4, with 6 shutouts, a 207 goals against average, and 915 save percentage. And in the playoffs, he played all 26 games and had 16 wins, 10 losses, 2 shutouts, 258 goals against average, and 911 save percentage. However, he was very inconsistent in the playoffs. But Jonathan Quick, it was a good regular season for him, and he was the starting goaltender for Team USA at the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, Russia. So it was a memorable year for him overall, even though USA did not even win a medal. They finished in 4th place. But despite the fact that they would eventually go on to win the Stanley Cup, there was a point in the season where it didn't even look like it, because at one point in their season, not only were they losing consecutive games, but they couldn't score a goal. They couldn't score more than a couple goals a game. Sometimes they couldn't even score more than one goal, and sometimes they would just get flat out shut out. Jonathan Quick was good in those games, but the Kings defensively, and they were fine defensively in those games, they just couldn't score, and they lost a lot of games because of this. Last season, they were one of the worst teams offensively, 26th in the league at a 2.42 goals for percentage, and their power play was even worse. Their power play, 27th in the league at 15.1%. Only the Carolina Hurricanes, Buffalo Sabres, and Florida Panthers finished with worse power plays than the Kings. The Kings, among all the teams that made the playoffs, had the worst power play, and they even had a worse power play than most of the teams that didn't even make the playoffs. So, offensively was a struggle for the Kings last year, which is why at the trade deadline they needed to get somebody who could help them offensively. So in result of this, they went and acquired forward Marian Gaborik from the Los Angeles Kings in exchange for Matt Fratton. And it's yet another Columbus Blue Jackets trade that helped the Kings win the Stanley Cup. Remembering in 2012, they got Jeff Carter from the Columbus Blue Jackets in a trade that sent Jack Johnson, one of the team's most popular defensemen at the time, to the Jackets. Now they send Matt Fratton straight up to the Jackets for Gaborik. And Gaborik, as bad as he was with the Jackets this past year, when he got to LA, he was great. He fit well. He fit well with the Slovenian-born Anže Kopitar, who is considered to be one of the best players in the world today. One of the best all-around players for sure. And so the top line, those two together played great. And it helped the Kings climb back into the playoff race. And even though they didn't win the division, their final record last year, 46, 28, and 8 for exactly 100 points, which was good enough for third in the Pacific Division and sixth in the Western Conference. So, the playoffs come around. The miracle run for the Los Angeles Kings. They go up against, through the first two rounds, they go up against both of their arch rivals from California, starting with the San Jose Sharks. And the San Jose Sharks gave the Kings a run for their money, and it was pretty much almost over for the LA Kings, as the Sharks, while holding home ice advantage, would take a 3-0 series lead, and the Kings would put themselves in history, becoming just the fourth hot NHL franchise and fifth sports franchise overall to come back from a 3-0 series deficit. They came back 3-0 down and went on to win the series in San Jose, beating the Sharks in 7 games. A major letdown for the San Jose Sharks. In the second round, the Los Angeles Kings would go up against their other California arch rivals, the Anaheim Ducks. It would mark the first time that those two would play each other in a playoff series. They played each other in the Stadium Series game at Dodger Stadium, and the Anaheim Ducks won that game by a final score of 3-0 while being considered the road team. Not to mention, the Ducks dominated the Kings in the regular season series, winning 4 out of the 5 meetings, and in the one meeting they lost, they got a point. The Kings looked to get revenge on the Ducks for this, and they managed to take the first 2 games in Anaheim before Anaheim would come storming back to win the next 2 games in LA, and then Game 5 in Anaheim. Though the Kings did make it close, the Ducks would win that game and take a 3-2 series lead. The Kings, not determined to go quietly, would scratch off a Game 6 victory on their home ice by a 2-1 final score. And then game number 7 back in Anaheim, a bad game for the Anaheim Ducks, which meant great news for the Los Angeles Kings. The Ducks did not show up to Game 7, and the LA Kings took advantage. They went on to win by a final score of 6-2, and eliminating the Ducks in 7 games. Next, in the Western Conference Finals, the Los Angeles Kings would have a Western Conference Finals rematch with the then defending Stanley Cup champions, the Chicago Blackhawks. And it was the Blackhawks that knocked out the Kings in the previous Western Conference Finals series in 5 games. One of 2 rematches the Kings had in that playoffs. The San Jose Sharks series was also a rematch. They played them in the second round in 2013 and won in 7 games. A series in which the home team won every game. The Kings had home ice advantage in that series. Now, against the Chicago Blackhawks, the Hawks had home ice advantage, and the Hawks would take Game 1 of that series, but then the Kings rolled through it from there, taking Game 2 in Chicago, and then both games in LA. And the Kings would take a 3-1 series lead, but unfortunately for the Kings, it took them quite a while to seal the deal. Game number 5, the ex-Los Angeles King, Michael Handzus, wins the game in overtime. Actually, it may have even been double overtime. And then Game 6, a big performance by the line of Patrick Kane, Andrew Shaw, and Brandon Saad, a newly formed line, would power the Hawks to I believe it was a 5-3 win or a 4-3 win, but ultimately the Hawks would tie the game, sending Game 7 back to Chicago. This was an interesting game because the Hawks had the lead 3 times in the game. They had a 2-0 lead in the game. The Kings came back to tie that game. They had a 3-2 lead in the game. The Kings tied it. They had a 4-3 lead in the game, and they tied that up as well before Alec Martinez goes on to score the overtime winning goal to send the Kings to the Stanley Cup Finals for the second time in 3 years in their 3rd straight Western Conference Finals appearance. In the Stanley Cup Finals, they would go on to face the New York Rangers, and in that series, the Kings would hold home ice advantage because they had more points. The Rangers were seeded higher, but the Kings had home ice advantage because they had more points. And it was a much closer series than it looked, because all 3 games in Los Angeles did go into overtime. Game 1, the Rangers took a 2-0 lead and blew that game. The Kings went on to win in overtime. Justin Williams, or Mr. Game 7, as he is now called, because in that Chicago series, he would break Doug Gilmour's record for most points in Game 7s of the playoffs. But he would score the overtime winner in Game 1. Game number 2, a game that the Rangers had. They had a 2-0 series lead in that 2-0 lead, and then a 2-1 lead in that game. Then they had a 3-1 lead and a 3-2 lead, and then ultimately took a 4-2 lead. Actually, no. I miscalculated, I think they had a 2-0 lead, and the Kings came back to tie it, and then they took a 4-2 lead. But then, a bad call on the ice by the officials that led to a Dwight King goal that never should have counted, motivated the Kings to come back in the game. Dwight King scored a goal in which it was a clear goaltender interference that was not called. The Kings would come back to tie the game. Marian Gaborik would tie the game. And then in overtime, the captain, Dustin Brown, would go on to score the overtime winner. I believe that may have came in double overtime, actually. Next, the series shifts to New York. Game 3 at the Garden was the only game in which the Rangers actually outshot the Kings, but a bad performance by Henrik Lundqvist led the Kings, and an unbelievable performance by Jonathan Quick would give the Kings a 3-0 win in Game 3. the only game that was dominated by either team in terms of the score. With the Rangers facing elimination, they would scratch off a Game 4 victory at the Garden, a game in which the Kings actually dominated and outshot the Rangers 41-19, but a strong game by Henrik Lundqvist led the Rangers to a 2-1 victory in Game 4 to stay alive and set an all-time record for most wins, playoff victories when facing elimination in the playoffs. Or, excuse me, I think the record actually just applies on home ice. Yes, most consecutive home ice playoff wins when facing elimination. Game 5, back to LA. Rangers take a 2-1 lead in the game. The Kings actually got the first goal. Rangers then took a 2-1 lead in the game, but then another bad call by the officials. A knee-on-knee play by defenseman Jake Muzzin on Ranger forward Matt Zuccarello led to a Matt Zuccarello penalty that should have actually gone to Jake Muzzin. Marian Gaborik ties the game on the power play, and then in overtime, defenseman Alec Martinez, the Game 7 hero in the Blackhawks series, joins a 3-on-2 rush, scores the Game 5 overtime winning goal, which was also the Cup winning goal off a bad Henrik Lundqvist rebound. So Alec Martinez was a hero twice, and the Los Angeles Kings would go on to win the Stanley Cup by defeating the New York Rangers in 5 games. They would win the Cup on home ice. And that followed 3 straight Game 7 road victories. Just absolutely amazing. However, as amazing as it all was, one could tell you that that there were a lot of negatives taken out of that series as well. Like, for example, Jonathan Quick did not have the same kind of postseason he had in 2012. 2012, he won the Conn Smythe Trophy and earned it. In 2014 and even 2013, the lockout shortened year, he was very inconsistent. He was very, very inconsistent in the last 2 playoffs, which does lead to some questions. Mr. Game 7 himself, Justin Williams, would go on to win the Conn Smythe Trophy. He was the leading scorer in that series, and I believe he was the leading scorer in the playoffs. Marian Gaborik actually finished as the leading goal scorer in the playoffs. He was absolutely tremendous throughout that whole playoff. He led the entire postseason with 14 goals, his first Stanley Cup ever. So Marian Gaborik finally, after a rough season, combined with the Columbus Blue Jackets and LA Kings, if we look at his statistics from last year's regular season, he missed some time last year too. Because of the time he missed, he only played 41 games. He only played half the season. 41 games, and had a combined 11 goals, 19 assists, and 30 points. He was a +7 rating, but all that plus came as a King. He only had 10 penalty minutes. It's good news for him. 96, 97. And he had 103 shots on goal. However, most of those points came with the LA Kings. With the Blue Jackets, he only had 14 points through 22 games, whereas with the Kings, he had 16 points in 19 games. But then in the playoffs, he took it up to a complete another level. And through 26 games, he played all 26 games and had a postseason leading 14 goals, which was 1 goal shy of Wayne Gretzky's franchise record for most goals in a postseason. 8 assists, 22 points, a +6 rating, and 78 shots on goal while only obtaining 6 penalty minutes. Just absolutely tremendous. And what a comeback for Marian Gaborik. And because of how well he played in the postseason, Marian Gaborik was rewarded with a 7-year contract extension a 7-year contract extension worth $34.125 million, which is a salary cap charge of $4.875 a year, according to $8 million a year, according to CapGeek.com. But Marian Gaborik, now I personally think that is a bit of a risk, even though the money is valid. He is 32 years of age. He'll be 33 on February 14th of next year. He's officially exiting the prime. He's pretty much in the last year and a half of his prime, which means he'd probably be 39. He will be 39 by the time his contract comes to an end. You gotta wonder if he'll still be good when this contract is still going on, and heck, you gotta wonder if he's going to be good this year as well. Will he have the same kind of performance that he had in the postseason? We'll see. I think this is a risky contract to sign, but it is the Kings' big off-season move, re-signing Marian Gaborik. They also made a couple of other re-signings as well this off-season, and that included re-signing left-winger Dwight King, who was a restricted free agent. They signed him to 2 years, a bridge deal, and they also signed defenseman Matt Green, who was an unrestricted free agent. They re-signed him, giving him a 4-year extension that keeps Green, who is an alternate captain who was scratched in 16 of the final 22 regular season games, but returned for a regular role in the playoffs. That keeps him with the team longer than many expected. The big battle for this offseason was between Matt Green and veteran defenseman Willie Mitchell, because one of them was not going to stay. The Kings only had the cap space and the ability to keep one of them, keeping in mind that they wanted to re-sign Marian Gaborik and they had to re-sign Dwight King. The original belief was that Willie Mitchell was going to be the defenseman to stay and that Matt Green was going to be on the way out. Regardless, they're both very similar players. They're both shutdown defensemen. But ultimately, to everyone's surprise, it was Matt Green who was re-signed, and he was re-signed to 4 years. And honestly, even though most people say Willie Mitchell should have been the one re-signed, I actually think it was smart that they made Matt Green the one to stay. And the reason being is really all comes down to the age factor. Matt Green is only 31. He still has a few years left in his prime. He's still relatively young. He won't be 32 till May 13th. And last year, through 38 games played, 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points, a +6 rating, 47 penalty minutes, and 38 shots on goal. And last year in the playoffs, 20 goals, 20 games played, 4 assists, +5 rating, 16 goals, 16 penalty minutes, I should say, and 13 shots on goal. But again, he's a shutdown defenseman. He's not going to get points. What's important is the plus rating, which he was in both the regular season and the playoffs. But he's 31 years of age, whereas Willie Mitchell is 37 years of age. He won't be 38 till April, but still. Last year, 1 goal, 11 assists, 12 points through 76 games, a +14, 58 penalty minutes, and 73 shots on goal. And through 18 playoff games, a goal, 3 assists, 4 points, +10, 20 penalty minutes, and 23 shots on goal. So yeah, his plus rating was better than Matt Green's. However, the age factor and the injury concern, I think, was really what played a role in this, because Willie Mitchell, but prior to this past season, did not play a single game in the 2012-2013 lockout-shortened year. His health has been in question over the last few years. Obviously, last year he was relatively healthy, but the fact that he is 37 years of age had to have Coach the coaching staff and front office concerned. So, in result, to me, I think keeping Matt Green and letting Willie Mitchell go was the smart choice. And for the Kings, as far as subtractions go, getting to that now, Willie Mitchell was really the only major subtraction for the Los Angeles Kings this offseason. But that's okay because when it really comes down to it, they have enough defensive infrastructure to replace him. They have enough depth on their blue line, and they have enough guys where they can easily replace Willie Mitchell. Willie Mitchell is the 37-year-old is the big departure for the Los Angeles Kings. They could not afford to keep him because of cap and because of some of the younger defensemen coming up. He went on to sign a 2-year deal with the Florida Panthers. And the other sort of significant loss for the Los Angeles Kings was the loss of top prospect center Lyndon Vay. They ended up trading Lyndon Vay at the draft to the Vancouver Canucks for the second round 50th overall selection, which the Kings would use to select Kingston Frontenac's offensive defenseman Roland McEwen, a guy who many believe could have been picked in the first round. Roland McEwen was their 50th overall pick, but the Kings also had a first round pick in that draft year. They had the 29th overall selection, which would have been the 30th overall selection had it not been for the New Jersey Devils penalty at the draft from the initial Ilya Kovalchuk deal. But the LA Kings went on to select Swedish centerman Adrian Kemp with the 29th overall pick. They were very happy that he was still available when it came their turn because he is a Los Angeles Kings type player, a hard worker who gets into those dirty areas. He will play another year in Sweden, but will be expected to come over to North America in 2015, 2016, and make the team as a 19-year-old because of how he plays. He is a Los Angeles Kings type player, and he'll be one of the late first-round steals for sure. But Lyndon Vay, again, he probably would have been the Kings' top prospect this year had it not been for trading him. He was one of their best prospects for the last couple of years. He even played 18 games last year. He didn't really do much in those games. He was even in plus minus, and he only had 8 shots on goal while not obtaining any penalty minutes. He didn't even have any goals, but he did have 5 assists. Those 5 assists were all he had to show in his 18-game call-up. But the fact still remained that he is going to be an NHL player, and he probably will be on the main roster for the Vancouver Canucks this year. And he was one of the Kings' top prospects, and probably would have been their top prospect this year had they kept him, despite the fact that he is now 23 years of age. But he's ready to make the NHL roster, but there was no room for him to make the roster because of how deep the Kings are. The Los Angeles Kings are not a team where making the roster is going to be easy. It may not even be possible for anyone this year because of how deep they are. A guy like Tyler Toffoli, to me, guys like Tyler Toffoli and Tanner Pearson, to me, are very lucky to be making the rosters as young as they are. Tanner Pearson in particular, he played a major role in the postseason last year, played all but 2 games, and won the cup with the team. So, a guy like Lyndon Vay, there was no room for him to stay, and so they had to get rid of them. And they also lost forward Colin Fraser, who played a few games last year, was a big part of their 2012 Cup championship team, but didn't play enough games in the regular season this year to have his name on the Cup, and he didn't even play a single game in the playoffs. So, he did not get his name engraved on the Cup this year. Colin Fraser is still a free agent, and I believe, I don't believe he's gone to the KHL, but nobody has signed him yet, at least in the NHL. So Colin Fraser will not be back in LA. And again, Lyndon Vay was dealt to the Vancouver Canucks at the draft for the 50th overall pick. And Willie Mitchell was also gone. He's probably their biggest departure of all. He went on to sign with the Florida Panthers. Other than that, as far as additions are concerned, the Kings didn't really do much this offseason, and quite frankly, they don't really need to. Re-signing Marian Gaborik and Matt Green were the two big priorities, and also getting Dwight King under contract as an RFA. Those were the big priorities, and the Kings met those priorities. Marian Gaborik's re-signing was the big move by the Kings this offseason. The only two players they brought in are really for depth purposes. Is David Vandergulik, who's coming over from the Colorado Avalanche, and Adam Cracknell, who's coming over from the St. Louis Blues. David Vandergulik probably won't even make the roster. His most likely destination will probably be the Manchester Monarchs of the American Hockey League. He only played 2 games last year for the Avalanche, and only had 3 shots on goal to show, so he won't even be on the roster. Adam Cracknell might play on the main roster. He's 29 years of age. He just turned 29 on July 15th. Last year, he only played 19 games for the St. Louis Blues and only had 2 assists to show for it and 16 shots on goal. But he did appear in 5 of their 6 playoff games last year and did have a goal to show for it. As well as 2 penalty minutes and 6 shots on goal. So he was okay. He was solid in the playoffs for the Blues this past year. He's more of a defensive type player, but he's more of a defensive type player. And he could crack the main roster for the Los Angeles Kings this year, but probably as a 14th forward. Because Jordan Nolan is the 13th forward, he'll probably be the 14th forward. So, in a technical sense, as far as bringing in new players, Adam Cracknell is probably the big signing by the Kings this offseason, and it's not really that significant at all. And, of course, David Vandergulik, who was brought in from the Colorado Avalanche, he'll probably go to the minors. He may get called up for a couple of games, but he's not going to be on the main roster. And it's really amazing because now the Kings, with all these re-signings and these 2 depth signings, are about $208,000 under the salary cap. So, hence the reason why they didn't have the room to re-sign Willie Mitchell, and they barely had the room to bring back the guys that they had to bring back as it was. Which now takes us to some of the big questions for the Los Angeles Kings this offseason. And probably the biggest question of all, will Brayden McNabb make an impact this season? They acquired defenseman Brayden McNabb from the Buffalo Sabres at the trade deadline in exchange for forwards Nicolas Deslauriers and Hudson Fasching, who was a major part of Team USA's 2014 World Junior Championship team this past year as one of their best third-liners. Brayden McNabb is 6'4", 208 pounds. He's a very physical defenseman, but is really yet to break out. He really has yet to break out. He only played 12 games last year and really didn't do anything in those games. He was a +1 with 6 penalty minutes and had 10 shots on goal, but no points. Whereas in 2011-12, 2 seasons before that, with the Sabres, he played 25 games and had a goal, 7 assists, and 8 points, 15 penalty minutes, and 23 shots on goal, while holding a -1 rating, but making him an even 0 for his career. But he is a defenseman who, at 23 years of age, he'll be 24 on January 21st, could crack the roster this year, but it's going to be really tough because the Kings are really deep on the blue line as it is. Um, you know, so he'll go into training camp and have the ability to fight for a roster spot this year. So hopefully it works out for Braden McNabb. But the LA Kings are a hard roster to crack. So good luck to him. How will Mike Richards and Dustin Brown rebound? As good as the Los Angeles Kings were as a team last year, there were some downsides, and those two players were included in that conversation. Mike Richards, for example, who's 29 years of age, he'll be 30 on February 11th. He just has not been what the Kings expected him to be ever since they got him. And in the lockout, even though he had technically less points during the lockout Jordan year, those 32 points came in 48 games. And 32 points is actually relatively good numbers for 48 games. Last year, he played a full 82-game season and only had 11 goals, 30 assists, and 41 points. He was a -6. He was a -8 in the lockout Jordan year. 28 penalty minutes and 157 shots on goal. He generated a lot of shots, so it wasn't like he didn't have any chances. But Mike Richards really has fallen out of favor in the LA Kings system and was relegated to fourth-line duty, especially in the playoffs. In the playoffs, he wasn't much better. Through 26 games, 3 goals, 7 assists, and 10 points. Also a -6 in the playoffs. 17 penalty minutes and 43 shots on goal. Mike Richards has just not been the same player since leaving the Philadelphia Flyers, which makes you think that this has to be a big season for Mike Richards. This is a guy who is going to probably will begin the year on the fourth line, but they're going to have high expectations to really get his career back in shape. They think he has the potential to do so, and for the Kings, they can't afford him to have a bad year. Otherwise, if he's still playing the same way as the year progresses, we can expect to see numerous trade talks of Mike Richards being dealt out of Los Angeles. Yes, and if he doesn't get dealt, he would definitely be bought out via compliance buyout at the end of the year. But we'll see. Then, of course, you have the captain, Dustin Brown. For Dustin Brown, last year was his worst offensive output since joining the league. And playing 46 or more games. 2003-2004 doesn't count because he didn't really play that many games that year. This past year, through 79 games played, 15 goals, 12 assists, and 27 points, which, not including 03-04, is a career low. He was a +7, which is good news, but he had 66 penalty minutes, and he had 195 shots on goal. So he really struggled for most of the regular season, but really in the beginning of the regular season, he did pick it up once Marian Gaborik was acquired at the trade deadline. He was put on that top line with Marian Gaborik and Anze Kopitar, and he really picked up his game. And in the playoffs, he was really good. Through 26 games played, 6 goals, 8 assists, 14 points, a +7 rating, 22 penalty minutes, and 64 shots on goal. He was really good in the playoffs. That's where he started to look like Dustin Brown again. So at least for Dustin Brown, at least he managed to improve as the playoffs came around. But you still got to wonder if he can remain consistent this regular season. And can Mike Richards pick up his game, because he was just a bad player for them all of last year. Is there a cumulative effect of playing 64 Stanley Cup playoff games the past 3 seasons? The Kings, the Kings in the league last year, um, they in the beginning of the year they played more of a grinded out style, and that was what they were like in 2013. But it caught up to them in the playoffs that year. As the season progressed, they played more of an attacking style, which would seem to lend itself to less wear and tear that caught up with them in the 2013 playoffs. That's why in 2013 they didn't play well in that Chicago series, because they were so burnt out by the time they got there. But the Kings, they've won the Stanley Cup 2 out of 3 years and have been in the Western Conference Finals for 3 straight years. You gotta wonder if that trend is going to continue, or this year they're going to fall back down to earth and have some kind of a bad effect, a kind of a curse, if you will, of being in the Western Conference Finals for 3 straight years. We'll see what happens. I don't think it's going to happen to the Kings because of how loaded they are, but anything can happen in this sport. Will the Kings sleepwalk through another regular season? Or a better question might be, does it matter? Through all 3 of these years that they've made the playoffs, they've finished at the bottom half of the Western Conference. The lockout-shortened year was their best season positioning-wise, because in 2012 they were obviously the 8th seed, and last season they were the 6th seed. In the lockout-shortened year, they were the 5th seed, and they got beat by the Blackhawks, the Chicago Blackhawks, in the Western Conference Finals that year in 5 games. So, it may not matter in the end, but because of how good they are once they get to the playoffs, because this is a team that is built. They're not built for the regular season. They're built for the playoffs. Once they get there, that's where they really turn it up and really do their damage. But at the same time, it would be nice to finish atop the Western Conference standings and have home ice advantage in the first round, and maybe even win the Pacific Division, which the Los Angeles Kings do definitely have the potential to do. They have the roster to do it, and they have the potential to do it. Jonathan Quick is a good goaltender. Though inconsistent at times, he's still considerably one of the best in the league. So they definitely have the potential to do it. But speaking of Jonathan Quick, will he recover quickly from wrist surgery? He is on track to recover from a June 24th procedure on his wrist that is expected to keep him out for 10 to 12 weeks, which pegs his return around mid-September. He came back from a serious groin injury to play in the 2014 Sochi Olympics, along, of course, with Dustin Brown. He was there as well. And even if he isn't ready, the Kings can afford to give him extra time with capable backup Martin Jones ready to shoulder more of the workload. But now, obviously, if that is the case, you got to wonder who would be the backup to Martin Jones while Jonathan Quick would be missing in action. Well, the answer is quite simple. Jean-Francois Berube, who is going to be the starter for the Manchester Monarchs full-time this year. He could be the guy coming up if Jonathan Quick is missing time. He would be the backup goaltender to Martin Jones during that time. But one of the questions I personally have for the Los Angeles Kings, this off season, is can a guy like Dustin Brown continue his output from the playoffs? Again, I mentioned before he had a bad regular season that picked up toward the end, and then continued on in the playoffs. Well, it's a different season now, and anything could happen. If you're a Kings fan, you gotta hope and pray that Dustin Brown can continue to be a factor, can continue the improvement that was going through the playoffs, and go back to being the Dustin Brown all Kings fans have come to know and love. A guy who will get 40 to 50 points a night and 20 to 25 goals and play a hard-nosed style. He definitely has the potential to do so. It'll be interesting to see what could happen to Dustin Brown this year. And actually, not just Dustin Brown, but Marian Gaborik as well. Can Marian Gaborik play exactly the way he did this regular season as he did in the playoffs? Will he be able to be able to keep on the pace he showed in the playoffs? Or is this just going to be another really bad injury-prone season for Marian Gaborik? And is that contract going to prove to be a really bad one for the Los Angeles Kings? Again, the amount of money per season isn't bad for a player of Gaborik's caliber. It's actually rather fair and reasonable. But at the same time, the concerning part is that it is 7 years. So we'll see what happens. As we now go and take a look at the Kings' projected lineup for this season. Well, it's pretty obvious what their top line is going to look like. Marian Gaborik, up until he came to the LA Kings, had been naturally a right winger with a left-handed shot, an off winger. But when he came to the Kings, he moved to the left wing side, his natural position, and he played great. And developed excellent chemistry with Anze Kopitar. Those two will be back on the top line together. Anze Kopitar will play the center position, and Marian Gaborik will obviously be on the left side. And the captain, Dustin Brown, will most likely man the right side on that line. Anze Kopitar, another great year for him last year, playing all 82 games and having 29 goals, 41 assists, 70 points, a plus 34 rating, which is a career high for him, 24 penalty minutes, and 200 shots on goal. And actually, in all due respect, it was kind of a comeback year for him in a sense, because he was good in the lockout shortened year, but didn't play up to his full potential. And he was bad in the playoffs that year. This past year in the playoffs, he was a point-a-game player. 26 points in 26 games, 5 goals, 21 assists, a plus 9 rating, 14 penalty minutes, and 46 shots on goal. It was his best postseason. Well, arguably, actually probably not. 2012 was a great postseason for him as well. So, that was arguably better. But you look at that top line, that is just a really good top line, even with, Dustin Brown on it, who had a bad year last year. Second line will be Jeff Carter, who centering Tyler Toffoli on the right side and Tanner Pearson on the left side. The two kids are definitely ready to make it full-time this year. Jeff Carter, last year, had his best season as since coming over to the Los Angeles Kings. Through 72 games, 27 goals, 23 assists, and 50 points, a plus 8 rating, 44 penalty minutes, and 256 shots on goal. And through 26 playoff games, 10 goals, 15 assists, 25 points, a plus 5 rating, 4 penalty minutes, and 73 shots on goal. Jeff Carter, always one of the most dangerous players in the league. When he shoots that puck, nobody can compare. Nobody's wrister. It's very hard to compare anyone's wrist shot to that of Jeff Carter's, because it's one of the most accurate shots in the league. It always gets through, and it more likely than not will go in the net or hit the post. I mean, he is just one of the most devastating players. He has spent time on the wing in his career in the past, and he's played on the same line as Anze Kopitar in the past. I believe there was a point where he was playing on that top line with Marian Gaborik and Anze Kopitar, but for this season, at least to begin the year, he will move to center back to his back to the center position, and that will create an excellent 1-2 punch with Jeff Carter with Anze Kopitar as the top line center and Jeff Carter as the second line guy. And then the two youngsters, Tyler Toffoli and Tanner Pearson. Tyler Toffoli really became a regular last year after proving himself greatly in the lockout shortened year. Last year through 62 games, 12 goals, 17 assists, and 29 points, a plus 21 rating, 10 penalty minutes, and 124 shots on goal. While through 26 playoff games, 7 goals, 7 assists, 14 points, plus 6, 10 penalty minutes, and 65 shots on goal. But he had a really good rookie season last year. However, there is much more to the 22-year-old that meets the eye. He can play both center and right wing. 6'1", 196 pounds, right-handed shot. The former second-round, 47th overall pick by the Kings in 2010. And there's just so much more to him than meets the eye. He was such a superstar for the Ottawa 67s of the Ontario Hockey League. And he was a stud down in Manchester as well. This guy, there's so much more to this player. He is eventually going to be a star in this league. He could go on to be a top 15 player, potentially. That's really to a high extent, maybe a top 20 player, but this player is going to be a stud one of these days, and eventually could overtake Dustin Brown for top line duty next to Anze Kopitar and Marian Gaborik. Tanner Pearson, he is a natural left winger. He was the 30th overall pick by the Kings in 2012. 6'1", 200 pounds. Last year, really made his first appearance in the 2013 playoffs. He played one game in that postseason as a 20-year-old. I'm pretty sure this was a player who was passed over in 2 drafts. He was drafted as a 20-year-old. He's 22 now. But then really showed what he could do through 25 games last year when he was called up. He only had 3 goals, 4 assists, and 7 points during the regular season, but he was a +2 with only 8 penalty minutes and 31 shots on goal. But in the playoffs, he really made a name for himself. He played 24 out of 26 games, 4 goals, 8 assists, 12 points, +10 rating, only 8 penalty minutes and 53 shots on goal. He proved in the playoffs that there's a lot more to him than meets the eye. He is going to be a real good top 6 forward for the LA Kings in the near future. The third line, really devastating third line. Jarrett Stoll centering Justin Williams on the right, and Dwight King on the left, who, as I mentioned, was re-signed as a restricted free agent. Last year wasn't one of Jarrett Stoll's best seasons, and actually, the last few years really haven't been great for him offensively. In the last 3 seasons, he's been more of a defensive player. Through 78 games last year, 8 goals, 19 assists, 27 points. He had just as many points as Dustin Brown, a +9 rating, 48 penalty minutes, and 109 shots on goal. And through 26 playoff games last year, 3 goals, 3 assists, 6 points, +6 rating, 18 penalty minutes, and 32 shots on goal. But so, over the last few years, he's been more of a defensive forward. However, one thing that will never change about the 6'1", 213-pound right-handed shooter at 32 years of age, Jarrett Stoll, arguably one of the best, if not the best, face-off men in the league. This is a player who is nearly impossible to beat in the face-off circle. He is so good in the face-off circle, and not to mention, he also possesses a really hard slap shot. maybe the hardest slap shot among any bottom six forward in the NHL. At one point, he had in the past played the point on the Los Angeles Kings power play. But Jarrett Stoll has also become a really good defensive player. So, this is a player who cannot go unnoticed, despite his lack of offensive numbers. Justin Williams last year, a really good year for him last year. Through 82 games last year, 19 goals, 24 assists, and 43 points. Not his best year since coming over to the Kings, but a good year for him. But he was a plus 14 with 48 penalty minutes and 239 shots on goal. He's 32 years of age. He'll be 33 on October 4th. But at this point in his career is more of a third-line player. But has the potential to be a top six player if he can increase his offensive output. But in the playoffs last year, he through 26 games played, 9 goals, 16 assists, 25 points, a plus 13 rating, 35 penalty minutes, and 67 shots on goal. He led all LA Kings players in points during the Stanley Cup Finals and won the Conn Smythe Trophy for Stanley Cup Finals / playoff MVP. So great postseason for Justin Williams, or Mr. Game 7, as he is called. He was so great in that series. And then Dwight King, Dwight King, he's really helped the Kings change the dynamic of their team since the day he came up and played. He was a major impact during their 2012 run. Last year, he played 77 games and set career highs. 15 goals, 15 assists, 30 points, a plus 16, 18 penalty minutes, and 111 shots on goal. And through 26 playoff games, 3 goals, 8 assists, 11 points, plus 5 rating, 20 penalty minutes, and 32 shots on goal. He has set career highs and is really setting the bar for himself. He's only 25, so he's still growing. 6'4", 230 pounds. Plays a real hard-nosed style. And he's a good player. He really does some good things out there for the LA Kings. So good for Dwight King, who really plays a pesky style. A really, really pesky style. He is a third liner right now, but also has second line potential in his future if he can increase his offensive output. And then the fourth line, we mentioned Mike Richards at center with Trevor Lewis on the right, Kyle Clifford on the left, and then Jordan Nolan as the 13th guy, and Adam Cracknell, their quote-unquote big free agent signing this year, as the 14th guy. Again, they got him from the St. Louis Blues. For Trevor Lewis last year, considered to be more of a defensive forward, but his best defensive efforts have come on the penalty kill. Ultimately, through his career, he has been a draft bust, and he is nothing more than a fourth liner. He has a lot of talent, has very gifted hands, and skates very well, but is mostly known for his penalty killing. He really doesn't do anything else. He doesn't play that great in any other situation. That includes 5-on-5. He is solely a penalty killer. Kyle Clifford, he is the physical presence on this team. He is pretty much the major fourth liner on this team. He is the penalty minute guy. Both of them did not put up big numbers last year. And then Mike Richards, again, I mentioned his rough season already. He knows he's a guy who's going to have to really play better this season. Because fourth line duty is not a place where he belongs. But the fact that he is even on the fourth line to begin with just shows you how deep this team is at center. But if Mike Richards can pick his game back up, then he has the potential to be promoted to the third line and put Jarrett Stoll down to the fourth line where he may belong, quite frankly. Jordan Nolan can play center or wing. Could actually be a guy who could see more of a role full time. He didn't play that much in the playoffs last year, but played 64 games during the regular season, which is why he got his name engraved on the cup. He could play more of a role this year if Mike Richards is eventually out of LA, which would be fitting for the fourth line. And then, of course, you got Adam Cracknell. He'll look to try to make the roster. He'll probably play some games, but he probably won't be a major roster player. But overall, this Kings forward group is so deep. And 13 of these 14 forwards have had their name engraved on the Stanley Cup last year. Adam Cracknell is the only one who didn't. They're just so deep at center. Their center depth is just unbelievable. It really is. And if you thought their forward group was good, their defense core may be even better solely because they are more of a defensive team. This is one of the best defense cores in the National Hockey League, even without Willie Mitchell. The loss of Willie Mitchell didn't take away any of their abilities on the blue line because they have guys like Alec Martinez and Jake Muzzin who are ready to play more of a full-time role. Robin Regehr is going to come back healthy. He missed a lot of time in the playoffs last year. But the top defense pair, Jake Muzzin and Drew Doughty. Jake Muzzin, we all know Drew Doughty. He is a stud on that blue line. Last year was just a fantastic year for him. He played 78 games, 10 goals, 27 assists, 37 points, a plus 17, 64 penalty minutes, and a career-high 177 shots on goal. He may not have put up the same offensive output that we saw him put up in 2009-2010. He hasn't put up the same offensive numbers since, but defensively he was great last year and also showed a lot of talent. And then through 26 playoff games last year, 5 goals, 13 assists, 18 points, plus 2, 30 penalty minutes, and 60 shots on goal. He was just so good. He was just so good in the playoffs. And then Jake Muzzin, he may be a player on the rise. I don't think anybody expected Jake Muzzin to be as good as he's become. Last year, he played 76 games, 5 goals, 19 assists, 24 points, plus 8, 58 penalty minutes, and 175 shots on goal. And in the playoffs last year, through 26 games, 6 goals, 6 assists, 12 points, plus 6, 8 penalty minutes, and 48 shots on goal. So, he plays more. He's projected to play more of a defensive role, but can contribute points. He was a 5th-round, 141st overall pick by the Pittsburgh Penguins of the 2007 NHL draft. He's only 25. He won't be 26 until February 21st. He's big, 6'3", 214 pounds, and he's only getting better. He still has a couple years to grow, but I don't think anybody anticipated Jake Muzzin to become as good as he has become. But you gotta wonder, he may end up being a star in this league for what he can do. And then Slava Voinov as well. Another excellent blue liner for the Kings. He played all 82 games last year and had 4 goals, 30 assists, 34 points. The 30 assists and 34 points are career highs. Plus 6, 44 penalty minutes a career high, and 143 shots on goal career high. So he was very good during the regular season. Although in the playoffs, he kind of did struggle a little bit offensively. 26 games played, 2 goals, 7 assists, 9 points, plus 4, 16 penalty minutes, and 39 shots on goal. So he was a plus player, but he's also known for his offensive abilities. He's only 24. He'll be 25 January 15th. But there's much more to Jake Muzzin than meets the eye, especially offensively. So, Slava Voinov, I should say. I said Jake Muzzin. But Slava Voinov, he's going to get better. He's got a few years to grow. He's still got a lot of growing room. But he's going to be better. He'll probably be better this season, hopefully. And because last year in the playoffs, he kind of did struggle a little bit. Robin Regehr will be his defense partner on the second pair. He's going to come back after missing most of the playoffs last year. But he was pretty good during the regular season, where it was a +6. But he's 34 years of age, obviously. That's a big concern. So he's not getting much younger. He's pretty much out of his prime now. But I think he can still be a really effective player for this group. He really can be. He was a +6 last year, and because he's a shutdown defenseman, the points really don't matter, although he had 3 goals, 11 assists, and 14 points for 79 games, 46 penalty minutes, 73 shots on goal. And he only played 8 games in the playoffs and generated 2 assists, an even plus-minus rating, 77 penalty minutes, and 3 shots on goal. So, for Robin Regehr, what lies in his future as a Los Angeles King remains to be seen. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he got traded at some point if he doesn't play well. And then on the third pair, Alec Martinez and Matt Green with Jeff Schultz as the 7th guy. Jeff Schultz didn't play a single game during the regular season last year, and he was their sole free agent signing coming from the Washington Capitals. But he finally made an appearance in 7 playoff games, and he was okay in the playoffs, not great. But he did not play enough to get his name engraved on the Stanley Cup, so he did not get his name on the cup. He's the only defenseman on this Kings projected roster that did not get his name on the cup. Matt Green, obviously, he was re-signed over Willie Mitchell. And I personally, like I said, think that's smart. And then Alec Martinez, last year, really stood out for the Kings. It was his best season last year, and there's much, much more to him. There's room for him to improve, and there's room for him to eventually come up and play a higher role. He is 27, though, so he's officially in his prime. Native of Rochester Hills, Michigan. But he played a career-high 61 games last year and set career highs in every area. Every area except penalty minutes. He had 14 penalty minutes. His career high is 18 from 2010-11. But every other area, 11 goals, 11 assists, 22 points, a +17, and 79 shots on goal. And in the playoffs, through 26 games, 5 goals, 5 assists, 10 points, +1 rating, 12 penalty minutes, and 38 shots on goal. And 2 of those 5 goals included the overtime winner in the Western Conference Finals against the Chicago Blackhawks in Game 7 at the United Center. And then the Game 5 Cup-winning overtime goal against the New York Rangers. So, Alec Martinez has kind of become a hero in LA, and it's that kind of thing that's going to give the Kings the ability to play this guy a lot more. So they're loaded up front, and they're loaded on defense, and they're even loaded in goal. Jonathan Quick is the projected starter, of course, when he comes back. He is expected to be ready for the beginning of training. He is expected, at the very least, to be ready for the beginning of the preseason. And, of course, Martin Jones is his backup. And they have Jean-Francois Berube as their third guy. He'll be the starter in Manchester this year. And as far as forwards also in the mix, they have forwards Jordan Weal and Nick Shore, the younger brother of Florida Panthers forward Devin Shore. These two are going to be good players. And then on defense, these are the players who of the also in the mix guys who could be the most ready to challenge for roster spots. Braden McNabb, who is probably the major player who's going to challenge for a spot this year, and Derek Forbert, who was their first-round pick in 2010, the draft that they hosted at 15th overall, native of Duluth, Minnesota. He's at 22 years of age, due to break out this year and become a key member of their roster. But this team, this Los Angeles Kings team, there's no need to really examine it very far, because even though this is a team that did not make many signings at all because they didn't have to, their team is just absolutely loaded. They are absolutely stacked. Offense, defense, goaltending, you name it. As far as what's the strongest and weakest parts of their teams, I mean, from a technical sense, the weakest part would, even though, they have the deepest, arguably the deepest center depth in the league, and they're arguably the best puck possession team in the league. They were the best puck possession team last year, particularly in the playoffs. But despite their center depth, from a technical sense, the offense would probably be the worst part of their team, just because their goals for was 26th in the league, and their power play was 27th in the league. That's the only reason why. Otherwise, a very deep center group. Forward group in general, actually. Again, Adam Cracknell, I think, is a underrated addition by the Kings, because he's another one of those rugged depth forwards who fits in the sneaky strong at puck possession profile, and he will take to Daryl Sutter's system well. Defense is probably the strongest area of their team. They have one of the best, if not the best, defense corps in the NHL, along with teams like the Arizona Coyotes, Nashville Predators, and the New York Rangers, and maybe even to a lesser extent the Minnesota Wild. So, and the Chicago Blackhawks as well. So, it's just such a deep defense group. They're again number one in the league in goals against for a reason. And then Jonathan Quick again. The reason the goaltending isn't the advantage over the defense, though, is because of Jonathan Quick's inconsistency from last year. Martin Jones, obviously, really filled in nicely last year. He's 24 years of age. Through 19 starts last year, 12 wins, 6 losses. He didn't have any overtime losses, 4 shutouts, and 181 goals against, and .934 save percentage. He also got into 2 playoff games. There were games where Quick was pulled and he came in as a replacement. He faced 7 shots and made all 7 saves through 56 minutes of play. So, there were games that the Kings did not win. So, but he really came up last year and really pushed Ben Scrivens out. Again, he was traded to the Edmonton Oilers. But this is such a deep group. It tells you, and it really does tell you, that there's very little room for guys to come up from the minors and take a roster spot. Which actually now takes us to the Los Angeles Kings' top 10 prospects. And as far as their top 10 prospects is concerned, Tanner Pearson is still technically a prospect, even though he did play in all but 2 of their playoff games. He didn't play enough games to be considered a true rookie last year. He'll be a true rookie this year while playing a full season this year. He is their number 1 prospect without question. And he is going to be he may be the only prospect in this top 10 pool that will make the roster this year. But regardless, this is a very deep prospect pool. Valentin Zykov, their second-round, 37th overall pick from 2013. He is a Russian stud. He's going to be a really good player, really good playmaker. He's number 2. Derek Forbort, their 15th overall pick from 2010, is number 3. And he, as I said before, he is going to challenge for a roster spot this year. And it's projected that he does make it this year. Whether he actually does make it this year remains to be seen. At the very least, he could be an 8th or 9th option for the Kings. And if anyone on the blue line does get hurt, which is definitely prone to happen, then Derek Forbort would definitely, at the very least, be a major call-up by the Kings. Their first round, 29th overall pick from this year, Adrian Kemp. We talked about him before. He is their number 4 prospect. 5 goals, 6 assists, and 11 points through 45 games played for Modo of the Swedish Hockey League. He'll play another year in Sweden. He doesn't turn 18 until September 13th, but he'll spend another year in the Swedish Hockey League before coming over to North America to have a shot at making the Kings in 2015-16. And if he doesn't make it, then he will probably spend 1 year in the Canadian Hockey League. So we'll see what happens. And then the rest of the way, Nick Ebert, number 5. He was the last overall pick in 2012 and had a great year last year, split between the Windsor Spitfires and Guelph Storm. Roland McEwen, the player who they technically got in the Lyndon Bay trade from the Vancouver Canucks. That was with the pick they got from the Canucks. John-Francois Berube at number 7. Zachary Leslie, number 8. Nikolai Prokhorkin at number 9. And Michael Mersch at number 10. So this is a good prospect pool, really good prospect pool. If I were to rate it, I would say it's definitely better than that of the Edmonton Oilers. It's probably at the level of the Arizona Coyotes, but I'd say the Arizona Coyotes pool maybe is just a little bit better, and obviously that's not as good as the Vancouver Canucks or the Calgary Flames. The Calgary Flames still have the best prospect pool of the Pacific Division so far, and maybe arguably the best in the league, or among them. But even though, yes, Tanner Pearson obviously is the number 1 guy, and there's no question about that. He's ready to make it this year full time. But the player on this prospect pool who I always found the most interesting, quite honestly, would have to probably be... This is actually a really tough choice, but I would probably have to say their number 5 prospect, defenseman Nick Ebert. Nick Ebert was the final pick of the 2012 NHL entry draft, the 7th round, 211th overall. He split last season between the Windsor Spitfires and the Guelph Storm of the Ontario Hockey League. And he played 65 games total. Kind of had a rough start to the year offensively when he was with Windsor, but once he got to Guelph, he really picked it up offensively. And he was just such a good two-way defenseman last year with Windsor and Guelph combined. 13 goals, 38 assists, 51 points, and an even more impressive plus 53 rating during the regular season. And during the postseason, he had 5 goals, 16 points, and a plus 13 rating in 20 playoff games to help Guelph to win the Ontario Hockey League Championship. He's 6 foot, 203 pounds. He's probably still a couple of years away from making the roster. He's gonna go to Manchester this year. He's now officially 20 years old, so he'll go play for the Manchester Monarchs this year. He is a native of Livingston, New Jersey. And he is just going to be one heck of a surprise from that 2012 NHL entry draft. So, that is why Nick Ebert is my top prospect for the Los Angeles Kings. Now, for the Los Angeles Kings, Obviously, you got to anticipate that this team is a cup contender once again. However, if they're going to be a cup contender once again, there's always room for improvement, and for the Kings, they really exemplified that last year. And the player on the Los Angeles Kings that needs to be better this season in order for the Kings to get back to the Western Conference Finals for a fourth straight year and get back to the Stanley Cup Finals for a second straight year and maybe become the first team since the Detroit Red Wings in 1997 and in 1998 to repeat as champions, and without a doubt has to be center Mike Richards. Obviously, one could argue that Dustin Brown could have been an option, and that Marian Gaborik could have been an option, and maybe even to a lesser extent, Jarrett Stoll could have been an option, or to an even lesser extent than that, maybe even Slava Voinov, just because of how inconsistent he played in the playoffs. And it could also come down to Jonathan Quick because he was inconsistent last year, but he still played well enough. But it's not Jonathan Quick because of the fact that he did play well enough to lead them to the promised land last year. Mike Richards is the guy because he had both a bad regular season and a bad postseason. Again, he played a full 82-game season and all 26 playoff games. In the regular season, 11 goals, 30 assists, 41 points, 28 penalty minutes, and 157 shots on goal. He did have a lot of shots on goal, but didn't generate the amount of points that Mike Richards has the potential to generate. In the playoffs, only 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points, 17 penalty minutes, and 43 shots on goal. And in both the regular season and playoffs, he was a -6. So he was a -12 combined. That is not good enough for a guy who was picked 24th overall in arguably the greatest draft of all time, or at least in modern NHL history, the 2003 NHL draft. He was selected by the Philadelphia Flyers. He was such a force as a member of the Philadelphia Flyers and was even their captain. But ever since he left the Flyers to come to the Los Angeles Kings, he has not been the same player. He's been a good penalty killer for them, I'll admit that. Penalty killing has been his strongest area since day one, and it still is. Always a dangerous player, shorthanded. Always generates chances to score shorthanded goals. But from an overall standpoint, he has not been the same offensive player, and last year really showed. This is going to be a big year for Mike Richards, who is still under a big contract. If he does not play better this season, expect the Los Angeles Kings to look into the option of trading him, and if they don't get him traded, expect him to be bought out via compliance buyout at the end of the season, because he really has not been what they expected when they got him. And really, I feel like the Philadelphia Flyers may have won that trade because Braden Shen has been really good since going over to the Flyers, and he's only getting better. Mike Richards is only getting worse. So, this is going to be a big year for number 10 in black and white. But he is not a fourth-line center, or at least he shouldn't be. He has the potential to be so much more because Jarrett Stoll, as good as he is at face-offs, he's really more suited for the fourth-line role. He's a guy who would mesh well with both Trevor Lewis and Kyle Clifford. Mike Richards is meant to play on the third line and maybe even the second line if he were to be moved to wing. But on the third line, he could play with Justin Williams. He could play with Justin Williams and Dwight King. He has that potential, but he has to play better. This is the guy who needs to be better for the Kings. He needs to get back to the way he was when he was with the Philadelphia Flyers. If he can do that, then the Kings are going to be a practically unstoppable force this season and may win more than just the playoffs and the Stanley Cup, but may also win the Pacific Division, potentially the Western Conference, and even potentially the President's Trophy. This is going to be a big year for Mike Richards. If the Kings hope to repeat as champions, or at the very least get to the Western Conference Finals for a fourth straight year, Mike Richards has to be better this year. He is the guy who has to be better this year. Overall, are the Los Angeles Kings a playoff team? That is a dumb question. For those of you who are asking if the Los Angeles Kings are a playoff team, that is an absolutely dumb question. Of course they are a playoff team. They are not just a playoff team. They are a Stanley Cup contender once again. I mean, they are the most. They may just be the most loaded team in the National Hockey League. They are absolutely stacked. Offense, defense, goaltending, you name it. There is no weak spot to this Kings team this year. Even with the loss of Willie Mitchell, they're still loaded on defense. Again, and even without this core, they have Brayden McNabb and Derek Forbort, who are both going to battle for spots, and they're both going to be good players. Their goaltending depth is just ridiculously good. Beyond Jonathan Quick, Martin Jones, Jean-Francois Berube has the potential to come in and be a good goaltender one day. And then up front, they didn't even have to really do anything this offseason other than get Dwight King signed and obviously re-sign Marian Gaborik. They did add Adam Cracknell, and he has the potential to maybe kick someone out of a roster spot and play a depth role and play on the fourth line. He'll definitely get into at least a couple games this year, but Jordan Nolan really is the 13th guy. Adam Cracknell has to settle as the 14th guy. David Vander Gulik, as I said, he'll probably just play in the minors, but could be a call-up if somebody gets hurt. But this Kings roster is just absolutely loaded, and there really aren't any holes to this team. I guess if you were to choose one weak spot, their one weak spot actually may just be their biggest strength, actually. That's really the interesting thing about this Kings team. Their one weak spot might just be their biggest strength, and that is their defense. As deep as they are on the blue line, they are not a very mobile defense group. They're very slow on that blue line. Drew Doughty is mobile, and Slava Voinov is mobile. Alec Martinez is pretty decent, is a pretty good skater as well. But beyond that, Jake Muzzin, he's okay at skating, but Robin Regehr and Matt Green, they are pure stay-at-home guys. If you manage to catch both of them out at the same time, and if you manage to beat any of their defense, that is your chance to score on the Kings. And then for Jonathan Quick, he is a butterfly goaltender. He plays down low. You have to beat him up high. So if you can get by the Kings' defense and shoot the puck up high, then you're going to be just fine. Otherwise, there's virtually no weaknesses to this team. They are absolutely loaded. They are going to go back to the playoffs. They are going to be a cup contender, and they may just win the division this year. This may be the deepest team that they've had since coming out of the lockout. It really may be. That really may be the case. They have a good group of youngsters coming up. Tyler Toffoli is eventually going to be a star. Tanner Pearson is eventually going to be a star. And, you know, even in their prospects, Derek Forbort, he'll be a really good shutdown defenseman in the future, and he skates well for his size. Brayden McNabb has a big shot from the point. Can play a two-way style. Not very mobile, but will be very good for this team. So There's really no argument about it. For those of you who absolutely cannot stand the Los Angeles Kings, as they have developed a bad reputation throughout this league, you cannot help but you can't help but admit that they are just an extremely loaded team, and they have the potential to repeat as champions. I would not be surprised at all if they did. They aren't necessarily my pick to win the Stanley Cup, but it won't surprise me if they do. So, with that being said, no matter how you look at it, no matter how much you try to deny it, yes, the Los Angeles Kings are a playoff team this year, and they are a cup contender once again. And that'll do it for episode 160 of Hockey on the Spot. Thank you all for watching today. Be sure to join me again tomorrow when we talk about the San Jose Sharks. So until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot, Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you all for joining me. I'll see you all again tomorrow. Thank you all, and have a great night.